good for the digestive system. I was seeing a little bit of signs of nosema. So I didn't want to use fumagillin. I haven't used that in probably 10 years. And I read a bunch of information on that, and the seaweed's supposed to help their digestive system. So I thought I'd try it. So they make a fondant, and so I got the fondant and I put it on. Before I came down to Maine, I was just down in Maine for a week.
Yeah.
And anyway, we'll see.
So to get Jen the link.
Yeah, you need to tell me what you. So you gave them roughage.
No, it's a fondant, and it's got some kind of seaweed extract in it.
Oh.
It has a very low ash content.
Uh-huh.
It's
Which
called
brand
either
was that?
Alive Hive or Hive Alive. One way or the other. I think it's Hive Alive. But they also make a liquid supplement to go into sugar syrup.
Downtown Portland. This first time in 4 years because I'm usually 2 months out. Tuesday nights.
I mixed a little Mount Gay rum into my fondant. We'll see how that works.
Okay.
Jeff, I can tell you, I've tasted it. It's delicious. If you wonder where all the fondant went, you'll find me passed out behind the hives.
Yeah, it's like fudge, huh, Andy?
It tastes like fudge.
My seaweed fondant probably tastes like fudge. Seaweed fudge.
It was delicious. Though to get yours, Karen, I had to dig through some serious amounts of snow. It was a lot of work.
Yeah.
I'm getting honest. There we go. Forward and forward.
Yeah, you told me a week ago, Karen, you couldn't find your hives anyway. How'd you? Yeah, so you must have put it on last fall, right? Yeah.
No, I put it on right before I went to Maine. We went up there with our tractor, and first of all, we made a road so I could get up there without snowshoes because the fondant was heavy. I didn't want to carry it all the way up there. I've been lugging things up all winter, checking on them and stuff. And snow blowed a road up to where they are. And then I just cleaned off the tops. I actually worked the hives on my knees, kneeling on a blanket and bending over to get down to the hives because the snow was taller than the colonies.
All right, just go to Zoom then.
Hold on.
Oh, and probably it came from me.
The wind blows and
Keith, we can hear you.
I'm sorry.
That's good. It's good to hear you.
We're just trying to get connected.
in between. Okay, 3 some hours. I mean, my computer's plugged in.
Meeting ID number
Yep. Yeah.
972
I can see I'm on the screen.
4650.
Hey, Andy.
Hello, Jeff.
They're like 6 times in a month
So
and a half.
good turnout tonight. 13 online, and who knows, maybe 20 people total. How many people are at the in-person meeting?
7.
7. So we've got 20 people. Way to go, Chris.
Yeah, I'm fishing down in South Carolina, so life's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very tough.
80
must be
degrees
lots
during the
of-
day.
Off your hives, huh?
I thought
What's
they're not.
that?
I said,
What?
you said you were down in South Carolina fishing. I said, that must be
Yeah.
why people are carrying away your hives today.
Oh, geez, I better reorient those cameras. Keep you off my property, honey.
Give me access to the screen.
Getting there.
Yeah.
Well, there was a sign out at the road said hives free for taking.
Free for the taking.
I know. I gotta bury them in the snow like Karen. That's the way to do it. That way they can't steal them. They're buried up to the top.
No, nobody can walk away with my hives.
They don't worry about all this insulation crap up there. They got Mother Nature doing all that snow. Just pack it in tight around it and
And then I went to the
They
front
make
to
it?
keep it
a little
open.
airspace, and you're all set.
Yes.
The only bummer is I couldn't get into backup.
Which sometimes might not be a bad thing. As long as they have enough food, but don't, I don't, it's so hard.
We've had a couple days with the bees and the silver maple out front, so, you know, too cold right now, but, it's, Mother Nature's starting to give us some good pollen.
I saw some birch catkins today.
Yeah, I don't see those where I am that I know of.
I gave a whole
I-
talk.
I saw some snowflakes today.
Oh, Karen.
Anybody have squill from a couple of years ago?
Only winter so far.
We're in the valley, so it comes up slow.
Yeah, that hasn't come up yet though, for me. I've planted all kinds of it, but I haven't seen it yet.
And then it's just been too cold.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they've been out flying, but
What is squirrel?
it's a
flower,
ball.
Siberian.
Oh, Siberian squirrel.
It's almost like.
It's a
crochet.
tiny,
Good-
tiny.
it's a-
I've got lots of squill in Portland.
Is it Siberian iris? It's like a little dwarf iris.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I haven't seen it out here. I don't know why. The crocuses were good. And,
Yeah, mine just started.
the squirrel hasn't come up yet.
I planted them last year though.
Snowdrops.
Find that purple pollen in your hive. I mean, the blue, excuse me, not
Yeah.
purple, blue.
Right now.
It's like
Yeah.
a navy blue. It's really pretty.
Yeah, it's kind of, what the heck is that? Yeah, oh, that's the spell, yeah.
Next week, that's gonna change.
Yeah.
Monday,
Saw
60
that.
degrees Monday. Crazy. Feast of Fam.
All right, should we rock and roll?
Chris, you ready to bang the gavel?
Teachers meeting has begun.
There you go. I have a gavel if you really want me to use one.
Oh, don't. We'll take your word for it.
Okay. I'll let the meeting begin. I'm assuming like always, we're gonna let our speaker go first.
Second
Very
motion.
good. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it. The nays can go back to sleep.
Yeah, they're here for the business meeting, right?
Yeah.
Weirdos. Yeah.
It does.
All right, Ms. Jen, you.
Little weirdos. All right. So I hope everybody's having a good night so far. Yeah.
Depends on what you say to us.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna build on the talk that I gave last year. So this one's titled Seasonal Management for Successful Overwintering, which is a lot. And so it's a really it's a really intense talk as far as content goes. So if you're missing anything or you want a copy of this, just reach out and I'll send you a PDF of it. So don't feel like you have to scribble furiously. But there is a lot of content. So this builds on the talk that I gave last year, which was on the 3 things for successful beekeeping. And for those of you who weren't here to see that one, it of course is varroa mites and viruses and other pests and diseases, but really varroa mites and viruses, nutrition and queen quality. Those are the 3 things you need to focus on and you'll be a successful beekeeper. It's easy. Like, that's it. Just a little bit of stuff. But if you missed this presentation, there is a recorded, you guys might have a recording from last year if you recorded mine last year.
Probably.
So yeah, you can check that out, but also the MSBA in their membership portal, there's also a copy of that presentation. So if you're a member, you can access those and, but I'm gonna do a little quick recap of them. So we're gonna start with varroa mites. You know, I'm gonna talk about varroa mites every single conversation that we have about bees, because it really is the most important thing that we have to deal with as beekeepers. It is the #1 cause of fall and winter deaths in Maine. And it feeds on the adult, pupal, and larval bees. So just not the eggs, everything else. And it's weird noise. And there was they're one of the largest ectoparasite host relationships. So that just means that they're really large compared to their host. So if we made bees as large as we are, I would love it. People would run right 4 to 5. I would have them as dogs like put them on leash and walk them around. But they would be this big on us. They can see me, right? Can they see me?
They should be.
Okay, good. So,
People.
yeah, they would be this big on us, which is pretty horrifying. We lose our minds for ticks, and you get a tick on you, and for hours, days, you are asking your partners, your kids, your parents to look in weird cracks and crevices because you feel something crawling on you. And so bees are living with these, and they're living with lots of them. And of course, they are very detrimental. They have a two-part life cycle. The first is the dispersal phase when they're feeding on our adult bees. And in this case, the female mites are moving from bee to bee. You can see one here. As the bees touch each other, this mite will just scurry over and move on to another bee. They also move from hive to hive through drifts. So if you have a hive or a bee that goes out that from a hive that has high mites, it goes out, it collects nectar and pollen, it comes back, and it lands on whatever hive it comes closest to. You know, sometimes they miss where they actually came from. They knock on the door, they're like, dude, I got food, and those bees are allowed in. If they have food, they'll let them in. And so bees are very social, just like us. I often joke that if you come to my house with a cake, knock on the door, I'll let you in. I don't know who you are, but you brought me food. You can have the Jason mask and a knife. And I'll say, oh, you brought a knife to cut it, Keith. Come on in. Butcher my whole family. And that's pretty much what actually.
That was cupcakes.
Yeah, cupcakes, perfect. But that's pretty much like what mites do, is they butcher your whole hive. And so they're feeding in this phase, they're dispersing around the system, flying around on our adult bees, with our adult bees, and they're feeding mostly on the underside of these bees in their abdominal segments. And they puncture the exoskeleton, and what they're feeding on is the fat bodies. And the fat bodies are really important in insects. They have 9 to 11 different functions. One is detoxification. So if the bee eats something toxic, the fat bodies break it down into non-toxic substances so it doesn't kill the bee. It's also their immune system. If the bee gets a pathogen in it, the fat bodies will eliminate that to make it so it doesn't infect them and kill them. And then also it's the backup energy supply. So bees can actually digest part of their fat bodies and eat that, metabolize it for backup energy when they're out of food. And then the last one, which doesn't get a lot of play, which I think is really important, is that fat bodies are in charge of thermal regulation for the insects. So what they do is the fat bodies send signals to the bees' brains to tell them whether they should be heating or cooling. And so if those fat bodies are compromised, these bees are going to get the wrong signals. And that's especially important during the winter. If they're getting the wrong signals, their fat bodies are compromised, they have no immune system, they have no detoxification, they have no backup energy. And then on top of it, they're getting mixed signals as opposed to what they should be doing, heating or cooling in the winter. That's a hive that's going to die. So, and they can live on our adults, feeding on them all winter long, just hanging out, feeding on them. And so their reproductive phase is in the larvae and pupa stage. So the female mite drops down, she hides in the food, until that cell is capped. Then she comes up and she starts laying eggs. Her first is unfertilized and turns into a male. After that, every egg is fertilized and becomes females. They continue developing, and then they emerge out as that bee, or right before they emerge out, the males and female mites mate. So then the female mites are already have sperm and they're mated. And then they emerge with the adult bees. They can go see the world in the dispersal phase and feed on our adult bees, or they can drop down into other cells and start reproducing. So, and our populations are doubling every 20 to 30 days in hives. So during when there's brood in them. And so our mite populations are increasing pretty fast. That doubling, makes it so there's about a 12-fold increase throughout the season. It's a good thing we have a brood break, because it would be 800-fold if we didn't. So if we lived in the South, but they never get that high because they kill them way before then. So, and then on top of it, in the saliva, so fat bodies are a thick organ. It's like a super thick milkshake that you can't slurp up through a straw. You've all done that, right? Where your cheeks go in and you're aggravated because you're like, I just bought this milkshake and I want to drink it now, but now I have to let it melt a little bit. what happens is the fat bodies are like that. They can't suck that fat body out through their tiny mouth parts. So what they do is they actually regurgitate into the bees. They throw up into the bees, and in that saliva is enzymes that break down the fat body and digest it inside the bees and thins it out so that they can slurp it up like the perfect milkshake. So unfortunately, also in their saliva are viruses. So they've wrecked the immune system of the bee by sucking it out, but they're also injecting viruses at the same time. So it's a double whammy. Most of the viruses are, there's almost 30 now identified, I think, and there's various variants of each of the viruses. Many have varroamite associations though, so they're highly linked. If you have high varroamites typically, or if you see virus symptoms, you probably have high varroamites. They're linked that way. And then most of them though have this generic symptoms. I can't tell you what the virus is just by looking at it. There is one deformed wing virus here up in the, I skipped kindergarten, so my left and rights are terrible. Upper right, you can see the deformed wings, and that's a really apparent viral symptom. But other things like trembling, paralysis in insects is not like paralysis in us where we can't move or we can't move parts of our body. Paralysis in insects is really that they're moving in a jerky fashion. It's not a smooth fashion. So if you see a lot of kind of, it's almost like horror movies. If you see the creepy, anybody watch them? Do any of you watch horror? I love horror movies. It's the only way my little black heart ever feels anything. That's a joke for everybody, but kind of true at the same time. And so where you see the creepy girl at the end of the hallway and she's got the long stringy hair and all of a sudden like the lights do that flashing thing and then she's like right here. It's kind of that jerky movement. It's not fluid. And so they can look greasy looking. So the bottom right picture, you can see these are all honeybees. Very greasy. Some of the viruses cause them to develop without hair. Others cause them to kind of pull out their hair, which is kind of creepy. And then they can get darkened bodies. So the bottom left picture is, that's a honeybee. If I see a lot of these, I would say you have a high virus count. This is a virus bee. And of course, small size, and they don't live as long. So this can be really terrible. And so it's the biggest problem facing honeybees. They carry and spread viruses. They will kill your hive if you don't do something about it. So you're going to see this graph several times through the talk, and it's just a kind of very generic sort of honey growth. Are you missing me?
No, you're fine.
Oh, okay. Where bees are increasing, and you can see the mites are not increasing populations during the winter. They're actually going down a little bit because there's no brood for them to reproduce in. But as soon as we get brood and our bee numbers start increasing, then those numbers also of mites start increasing. All right, so that's varroamites. See, that was quick. That's quick. I know I usually talk about them ad nauseum. Don't worry, I'll talk about them a lot more, but I work it into the talk. So you don't see it's like putting sugar with the medicine. The other thing that I talked about last year was nutrition. Bees need pollen, nectar, water, and plant resins to make propolis. And so when you're looking in your hive, you should always see some stored honey. You should always see kind of the rainbow. That's the ideal. And you should see wet larvae. So here, this is the rainbow where you can see the brood in the center. Nice pattern on this left one. The right one is a little spotty, but still it looks okay. And then next to the brood, you'll see a layer of pollen. So that makes the next color, the next kind of layer of the rainbow. And then nectar and some stored honey here in the corner around the top corners. And that's what you want to see in a hive. You want to see food. You never want to see, you want to see larvae that's nice and wet. So in the right-hand picture, these larvae are all floating in nice liquid, which we want to see. These on the left, you can see these are nutritionally stressed. There's like very little liquid in these cells. You can even see that they're starting to cannibalize some of this larvae because if they can't feed it, they're not going to continue raising it. So they start chewing them up and disposing them in front of the hive. So I like to say this is like a dry socket, like when you have one of those for your teeth. That's kind of what it looks like. So you don't really ever want to see that. And if you are, you need to start feeding. And so, what was the other things here? Sorry. Oh, so you want to look for signs of food stress. And remember that sometimes when bees cap honey, they ignore it, which is super weird. So if you have honey in the hive and you'd rather them eat that than you feeding them, you can always take a fork or something and scratch the cappings, and then they're like, oh, look, honey. They're not smart creatures sometimes. I mean, they're very sophisticated, but sometimes they don't do it. We write the bee books, they don't read them. Like, we think we know what they're doing, but they do their own thing. And then always keep an eye out for robbing. That's really important when it comes to food, because it can happen very quickly where a hive that was full of food, but maybe a little bit on the weak side, will get robbed out and killed or starved to death by another hive. And so if you need to feed honey in the winter, early spring, saved off a diseased free dead out, you want to warm it. You don't want to take it off of, in the freezing cold and plop it on another hive. That just sucks all the heat out of that hive. And candy, fondant, dry sugar in a pinch. I do not like feeding dry sugar. I find that bees just take it and dump it out the front of the hive really quickly. And so candy, fondant, or honey is the best options. In the late spring through the fall, you want to feed syrup, 1-to-1 or higher. I feed 2-to-1 all year round, and you always want to feed inside or on the top of the hive. The bottom right picture here shows an entrance feeder. They stink, they're terrible, they cause robbing, they leak, no hives are ever level. And then also if the syrup gets cold, the bees will not access it. So if you're feeding on top of the hive, like in an empty steep or something on the top over the inner cover, they can access that 24 hours a day. And so they're actually making you wax and pulling that stuff down 24 hours a day for you, where they cannot access that when that's in the front of the hive. And they also keep it warm, which is nice. And then the last one is the queens, making sure you have good quality queens. They're the most important insect in the colony. They're, of course, the reproductive female adult. They're usually laying somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 eggs a day during the peak of the season. And they're produced for a bunch of different reasons in a hive naturally, but also beekeepers will replace them from time to time. And most lifespan is 2 to 5 years, most 1 to 3 years, just because a lot of beekeepers end up replacing them after a year anyway. And so this is the queen life cycle. Most people don't realize, I found this out after I gave this talk, and somebody's like, oh my God, they emerge in 16 days. I was like, yeah, they're really early. They emerge very early. They're not long. And then they should be laying eggs, 23 days after they've been started, after that cell's been started. So if they're not, I always say give it another week, because some are slow developers, or they have to go on multiple flights, or they don't have a good fly period, and so it takes them a couple days to get out, but it happens pretty quick. And so queen quality, signs of queen issues: if you have no eggs or brood, that's a good sign that something is going on in your hive. If you have lots of drone cells, where you would expect to see worker cells, also a sign of a queen issue. Spotty pattern, a lot of emergency queen cups or cells. And just note that some skips are okay, and common late in the season that happens, where bees, as the new nurse bees are emerging, bees late in the season will start backfilling with nectar. And so you may start seeing a spotty pattern and think your queen is failing, but in fact, she's fine. It's just naturally what they do. So this is a nice pattern here. You can see she's laid very well throughout here. These are older larvae in the center of the picture. And then as you radiate out, you can see they get younger, but she's laying in a lot of these cells. There's a couple skips, but it looks like she even went back in and relaid some eggs in those skips. If you're seeing things like this is garbage. Sorry, that's really brutal, but this is a garbage pattern. You're seeing drones where you would expect to see workers in every single one of these pictures. The top right picture, you can see lots of drones, but also it looks like there might be some EFB developing, because as the populations become unbalanced and you get more drones, they're not taking care of larvae, which means the larvae are food stressed, and then you develop European foul brood. And so you can see that there's also some disease that happens in association with these failing queen hives. Oh, more patterns that are terrible. I see a lot of terrible patterns. So I like taking, this is another one too. You can see the slumpy larvae that aren't being taken care of in this top right picture. And the bottom right picture too. And so just bad patterns. All these queens should either be replaced or the bees should be shaken out. So that brings us to, that was our recap for last year. Are there any questions online or here?
Just I have a good question about Barrel Mike. So do they pursue any other insect in the environment other than bees?
No, so all the different species of Varroa are bee parasites. So the whole genus is all bee parasites. Varroa destructor is the one that we have here for on Western honeybees, the ones that we manage. That Varroa mite was not originally, has not been associated with Western honeybees, the ones that we manage. It was associated with a different honeybee in Asia. But in recent years, in the last 20 years, Western honeybees and Asian honeybees have been kept. Western honeybees started being managed in areas that Asian honeybees were kept, and that Varroa destructor jumped off of that species onto ours. So they never co-evolved. They have no natural immunity. And so they're kind of just hanging on by the seat of their pants for this one.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now with the Asian honeybees, they grew up with it, obviously.
Yeah.
So
They've come to, so when things co-evolve, it's almost, some people say it's like an arms race. It's a little bit more complex than that, but what happens is each, like a pest or pathogen, always tries to outsmart, and then the creature that it's parasitizing tries to outsmart, and so they develop kind of over time to become kind of an equilibrium kind of sort of thing. And so in the case of Asian honeybees, what they do is they allow Varroa mites to reproduce in their hive, but only in drones. If they find them in workers, they destroy them, but they'll let them develop in drones. And so they can continue developing, but they never get out of control. And the Varroa mite just doesn't ever really go into the workers anymore, because they're like, okay, we can live here and survive, we get food, we can reproduce, and we can continue spreading our genetics. And the honeybees are like, you step out of line, we're going to take you out if you go into the workers. And so they just develop this kind of, homeostasis. I think that's a real word, over time.
So why haven't we just imported Asian honeybees?
They are terrible bees to keep. So they're actually outlawed in the United States. They tend to be a little bit testy. They don't produce as much honey, and their survival is questionable in parts of the United States. So
like
yeah. Like Russian bees.
They're testy.
They are a little testy. Well, not all. I've had some sweet ones, but they tend to be a little more temperamental. So from this point, we're going to kind of start this seasonal thing. And I like to point out that we have 3 seasons in Maine. It's winter, mud season, and prepping for winter, which I think is, we all agree with that. And so really, when I first moved to Maine, my neighbor said this to me, and I hold it still to this day: you start prepping for winter as soon as mud season ends. You're getting your garden in, you're making sure you get your vegetables, canned and all that stuff during the summer so that you can get through the winter. And that holds true for bees. So winter prep doesn't start in September and October. That's when I usually get frantic calls from beekeepers like, hey, I have a failing queen, and she's been failing since July, and what do? I'm like, well, nothing. You can't do anything. And same thing, if you don't have food in your hive, by that point, you're already too late. If you haven't done anything for mites, you're already too late. And so really, winter prep starts your very first hive opening of the year. And that's the way that I want kind of people to think about it. And so we're going to see this graph a bunch, and I'm going to point out where we are on the graph as we're going through. And so, this is a normal bee kind of population. Our brood is the orange line, and you can see it stays lower than the overall population. But this is what a hive is kind of doing during the season. These 2 stars are kind of our 2 major honey flows. I don't know about you, but I have not seen an August-September honey flow in 2 years now. So it's been, not great the last couple of years. But these are typically where we get our 2 major kind of honey flows, with a dearth somewhere in the middle of the summer. It's not always like that, but in general, I think it was 4 years ago, we had back-to-back honey flows all season, and it was gorgeous, and everybody made 1 million pounds of honey. But it hasn't been like that for the last couple of years because of drought. So we're going to start in April, May. And so in this case, I'm breaking it up into two different categories just because some of you will be starting new hives, some of you will have overwintered hives. And so in overwintered hives, your brood rearing is in full force. They're really starting to increase. You can see those both brood and bee populations are increasing. In your new hive, this is where you're going to be installing stuff. There are pros and cons with both, either a nuke or a package, things like cost. One tends to be cheaper than the other, but also there's issues potentially with disease if you have brood, queen quality issues sometimes. And so it's all a personal choice. Do whatever works best for you, but know that each one comes with its pros and cons, whether it's a nuke or a package. Everybody always asks me what's best, and I can't. Yeah, it's really whatever's best for you. And so what you're going to focus on this month is your first inspection of the year in your overwintered hives. You're going to check your hive strength, queen performance, check your brood for disease, sample for varroa mites, feed if needed, manage for population buildup and swarm prevention, and reverse your brood chambers. We're going to go through those. And then in your new hive, you're going to be inspecting for health and queen condition. You're going to feed, and then you're going to test for mites at install, and then manage for population buildup and swarm prevention. So your first inspection is going to hopefully be on a nice day. I got a call 3 weeks ago from my counterpart in Massachusetts and said, our first packages arrive tomorrow. That's so early.
Yeah.
So I think there was actually a snowstorm that was going on when they were arriving. But hopefully, you know, if you are getting a package, you know, you're going to install it on, get a nice chunk of weather, install it during that time. But for your first spring inspection, you want to wait till your temperatures are above 50 degrees. Most people like to wait till 60 degrees. I have a lower threshold, so if it's above 50, I go. Sunny, no wind. And then you're going to estimate your worker populations. You can look at the tops of your frames. So if you have, you know, the tops and bottoms covered, you can assume that's a frame of bees, or you can look at the strength going in and out of your hive. If you're somewhere between 30 and 90 bees going in and out per minute, that's a pretty strong hive. It's doing a good job. If the population is small, you want to reduce the size of the hive. You don't want to give them too much space to start off with. So if you have a hive that just kind of squeaked through, put it into a nuke setup, a nuke box, wrap it, make sure it's staying warm, maybe give it some food. And if you unwrap your hives, which happens every year, unwrap your hive because it's a beautiful day and you're like, we're never going to get bad weather again. And then we get a 3-foot snowstorm in April. Make sure you wrap them back up, especially those small hives. Larger hives, they can do okay, but I would say put the wrapping back on them if you unwrap them prematurely. Yeah.
Ask a question as you're going.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the club hives is a little dinky.
Yeah.
And I was thinking on the way down about, like, if this was during the mid-season, I would think about like swapping spots.
Yeah.
With stronger hives behind them.
Yeah.
And then the weak hive, but would I do that now? or
Not
is it-
quite yet. No, yeah, not quite yet. Yeah, and that's a great way to boost. Actually, I'm gonna add that to this presentation. I've been giving this presentation to the different clubs and somebody's always got a little tidbit. And I put it in afterwards. So at the end of the year, when I present it to the MSBA for their webinar, it'll be the best version of it as I steal everybody else's ideas and say, oh, look how smart I am. But that's, you know, that's a great way also to boost. I always forget that one. But yeah, I would say it's a little too early for that. But once the dandelion's out, you could probably, when they're really foraging heavy, then I think you could probably get away with doing that. And then you want to make sure your queen is still there. You want to look at her laying pattern. You want to make sure you're seeing nice pearly white brood, a good little pattern. And I also suggest marking your queen if you can. It's the only way to tell really what's going on with your hive, how old your queen is, whether it's swarmed, any of those things. If you're not marking them, you're kind of guessing. And so I usually tell beekeepers, for most beekeepers, it's easier to see a marked queen, and you can better track their age, and then you know if there's a swarm. And I also, so if you're seeing this needs a new queen, any of these, or to be combined with something else, because we already saw these patterns. So easier to see, better track age, know if there's a swarm. So here we have a queen on this this thing. Don't yell it out, Keith. And so there's not very many bees here, but it can be hard to find a queen even when there's a few bees. But if you have her marked, you can see her right there in the corner, just hanging out with her friends. And so marking a queen can really help. And then, what was the last thing? And then requeen any failing or poor performing queens. It's a little bit hard at this point to get a queen locally. So you may have to order one, and really it's going to be coming from someplace that maybe you don't want to get a queen from, like Texas, where they have Africanization. But if you have another hive that's super strong, you can always combine them and then split them later on. Or if you have two smaller hives, one has a good queen but is a small population and could use a boost in population, you can combine those. And then you also want to monitor for mites. You want to not have to chase your mites all season. So if you have a problem to start off at the beginning of the season, that's not going to go away. It's just going to keep developing. And so you want to start the season low because it's easier and cheaper. You're going to be doing less treatments then. And also those small hives coming out of winter are easier to treat. Like when you have fewer bees, your treatments are better. Especially if it's something that works by fumigation or something that works by contact, the more bees you have, the harder it's not going to work as well.
More dilution.
Yeah, it's dilution. It's a solution to pollution, but it's not the solution to mite control. And so, and then also,
Man, I've got a question.
yeah.
Hi, Jen. This is Andy Meyer. I'm curious about testing, monitoring for mites at this time of year.
Yeah.
Would it make any sense to treat them even without monitoring? Is there any reason to not give them an OA treatment now?
Well, I'm always of the mindset that I like to know if I need a treatment. OA is a little lower risk for queen failure and things like that than some of the other treatments. So if you had a really good fall cleanup, you did an OA or a couple rounds of it in the fall, you cleaned up your mites, you probably don't need one unless something weird happened. But if you are concerned about it, OA is a good option this time of year, vaporization. The brood though, I popped in one of my hives this weekend and I got a couple frames of brood going right now. So there is brood, that's going to also hide your mites and make OA less, what do you call it? Effective. Yeah, sorry, I've been up since like 4 a.m. so less effective. And so yeah, I always like monitoring. I just think the fewer treatments we do, the better. And we want to make those treatments like matter. So yep. Great.
And you do vaporization versus dribble.
Yeah, this time of year I would do vaporization. Dribbles, just because the liquid on top of the bees, and if they get chilled, it can cause some issues. So, of course, alcohol rolls, we know how to do these ad nauseum because I talk about it every single time. 300 bees or half a cup in a jar filled with alcohol, or 2/3 of the way filled with alcohol. You shake it for a minute, dump it in the pan, and then see what your numbers are. Oh, this is just me going through. Look how dirty my hand is. I don't know why this picture, for some reason that stuck out to me. I don't know why I squished so many bees on my hand. But so you want to find your queen. Of course, we found her earlier in the bottom corner. You want to choose a frame that doesn't have a queen on it, that has open brood, because that's going to be your nurse bees. You want to put your alcohol in a jar and then dump your bees into a pan. And then if you get nurse bees, they'll just chill out in there. They don't all fly out. If you get a lot of foragers, they'll fly out, but nurse bees haven't flown really yet. So they're super chill, that you dump them in a pan and they're like, okay, this is where we live now. Like, Just figure it out. And then you just scoop them up, put them in the jar, shake it up, put your live bees back into the hive. Shake, 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 and then there's a screen here. And I have screens up front already cut for regular and wide mouth jars, so grab them if you need them. If you're online and you need a screen for your jars, absolutely send me an email and I will, with your address, and I'll send you them in the mail if you don't have them already. We used to give out the jars, but I realized that all of you have basements full of canning jars. They come with main houses. If you just bought a house, it came with canning jars in the basement. Keith
Or
is
in the
not,
shed.
or in your shed. And even if you've never canned, you still save canning jars. Like, they're good jars. You might use them someday. Maybe you take up canning. And plus they became super expensive during the pandemic, so we couldn't afford them anymore. But you can see here, shaking out that liquid and then shaking some more. And then you can see the mites in the pan here and count them up. And that's a jar full of them. And then this here is kind of the general rule of thumb to figure out what your percentages are. I like to say if you are 0 to 3 mites, resample in 3 to 4 weeks, 0 to 3 mites. So that's less than 1%, 1% or lower. If you're in 4, 5, 6 mites out of 300 bees, you need to do something in the next week or 2. Because remember, those numbers are going to double in 20 days, 20 to 30 days. And so you don't want to wait too long because you're going to be way over threshold at that point. Plus, I like to know when I need to start doing something, because once you get 7, 8, 9 or higher, that you have to do something immediately. Like, you probably should have done something 2 weeks ago. And so you don't want to be in that panic phase. It's not a great place to be because you run out of options very quickly. It's like whatever you happen to have in the barn or in the freezer or whatever, and you throw it on there and the temperature might not be right and stuff like that. So having that kind of 4, 5, 6 range, when you hit that, you're like, okay, the temperature is really hot today. I know I want to use Formic or whatever. The temperature's too hot. I have to go buy it. I have a day or 2 to do that. So I can go to the shop and buy it. And then I can come back and wait for a day in the next couple of days. That's better temperature to install that. And so you don't want to be in that panic. So if you're in that 2% range, you have a week or 2 to do something. It's not panic mode. But if you're getting towards that 3% or a little bit like 2.5 to 3%, that's panic mode. So you should have done something already, but you got to do something immediately. You had a question?
When do you first test for mites with a new package?
At install.
And
then every month afterwards.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's monthly. I do my sampling every 3 weeks because I'm a little neurotic. But at install for a package or a nuke, you know where your queen is. She's in that little cage. So you put her in, and then you can just take your measuring cup right out of the package and do your mite wash there. You don't.
So you would do that even if you're installing on foundation?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we find, so several of the clubs have started asking their members to monitor for mites using alcohol rolls, the packages that they're receiving. And it's not unusual to see packages that need to be treated at install. We had some that were rolling 40s and 50s a couple years ago. I know. They all died. So
really good time for oxalic.
yes, and that's exactly the case. So when that hive is newly installed, you have no brood in there. Oxalic acid vaporization is a beautiful treatment for that time. And also the other treatments are going to be super effective as well. Things like Hot Guard, which is normally not a great treatment when you have lots of bees or brood, but when you don't and you have a small colony, that's a really good treatment. And so it really, you want to nip it in the bud early. Like, you want to nip any mite problems early. And then if you have to do something, you always want to follow up with a mite wash after you're done with it to make sure what you did worked. Because sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes these mite treatments fail. And you don't want to you know, I'm notorious for this. I like do something. I think I solved a problem. I just go inside and I eat Cheetos on the couch and watch old episodes of Doctor Who and don't worry about it anymore when what I did probably didn't work or maybe didn't work. And so it's really important to follow up with another mite roll after the treatment's done to make sure that it worked.
And robbing was crazy last year.
And robbing was crazy last year.
And swarming.
And swarming. Yeah, everything was
There
crazy
they go.
last year. Yep, there goes another one. And so also assess your food
Jen,
stores.
Jen, I have a question.
Yeah,
Cool. This is Andy Meyer again. I didn't hear you say the size of the scoop of the bees or the volume of the alcohol. Can you suggest, well, what we
so
should do?
half a cup of bees, which is 300 bees. Science has determined that. There was some poor student who probably spent a whole year of their life in a lab counting out how many bees fill up half a cup of scoop. And it's about 300 bees, and that's about where you want to be. And then it's about the jar, you fill it up about 2/3 full if you're using a pint-sized jar. So it's up to, yeah, just about 2/3. It doesn't have to be a lot. I mean, it doesn't have to be completely full. You actually, it's better if it's not, because you can't shake them as hard. So 2/3 full. And then if you're unsure, so I rewash my mites after I dump them out for the first time. All the mites will settle to the bottom of the pan, and then you can decant the alcohol on top without the mites pouring out. And I pour it back through the screen. I shake up those bees again, and I'll actually do a second roll on them to make sure that I didn't miss anything. If you want to be super nerdy about it, you can actually just take the jar back inside to the air conditioning and do your mite roll, but then also pick through the bees and count the number of bees. And you can find out a very exact number then of what exactly your percentage is if you're super nerdy. And you don't have to do your alcohol roll on the spot. So you can have a jar for every single hive, take your samples, do all your hive stuff, and then bring them inside and do your alcohol rolls later. They don't go bad because they're in alcohol, so they don't have to be done on the spot. You can actually wait till that evening to actually do the roll itself, but you want to collect the bees during the day.
And
Hey,
don't do that.
Jen, this is Jeff up online. Yeah, sugar rolls. People like the sugar roll. I want my bees to live through it. I'll put them back in the top afterwards. I'm going to be nice to my bees in a gentle sugar roll, and I'm getting the same result, right?
Absolutely not. Yeah, no, absolutely not. So it turns out I went to a conference, and we've known this, several researchers have shown it, but there was actually a researcher who really tracked this. It was Jennifer Ceruto's lab in, I want to say Oklahoma or Wisconsin, Oklahoma, I think. Anyway, so they actually wanted to put this to bed, and they did sugar shake rolls, and they did it with marked bees, and then they did just marked bees, and they followed the fate of those bees, and they found that after you sugar shake those bees, most of them die. It's just slower. So you're shaking the bejesus out of them. You're breaking their legs, you're breaking their antennae, you're breaking their wings. You're getting them all concussed, even though bee brains don't work that way. It's still messing up their heads. So most of them just die within 24 hours. And then a bunch of them also get, over the next 4 or 5 days, get pulled and disposed of out in front of the hive, because now they're damaged, and bees don't tolerate damaged bees. So they kick them out. It's the same thing with the queen. If the queen loses a leg or a wing or something, most of the time they'll drag her out and kill her and replace her for a lost wing. And so almost all of the bees in a sugar shake are dying, just slowly and more brutally. And the results aren't as accurate. Does that answer your question?
That's the point I wanted you to emphasize. And that also the reshake with the alcohol is really giving you the true measure too. It's that second roll with the alcohol that's going to give you that really true count.
Yeah. I like to be really sure about my counts. It's I like to say it's 300 now or 30,000 later. Plus, if you do an alcohol roll every single month that you can during the season, you're only going to be killing about 1,800 bees, which is 1 day of egg laying for the queen. When we put it in that perspective, it's 1 day, right? So it's not very much. And so it's a good way to kind of, it's just, yeah, it's a quick death. If I have to do it, I'd rather it be quick. So,
Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome, Jeff. Thank you for setting me up for my little rant. I always appreciate that. All right, and if you don't know whether your hive has enough food, you can always feed it. It doesn't hurt. Like in the last couple of years, I've seen very few overfed hives, like where they're going to swarm because they're out of room because they've been fed too much. Most of the time, people are underfeeding. So if you're in doubt, feed. I feed 2 to 1 all year round because I'm lazy and I have my buckets marked for 2 to 1. That's what they get, but not all year round. But if I have to feed during the middle of summer, I feed them 2 to 1. If I have to feed in the spring, I feed them 2 to 1. Everybody gets 2 to 1 all the time. And then also clean your bottom board, scrape debris. This is a good harbor for small hive beetle and wax moths and stuff like that. So you want to make sure. I'm always surprised when I find a hive that is living and their bottom board looks like this, in July. And I'm like, did you scrape out your bottom board in May? You should do that. Clean out all that debris. They don't need to live with that stuff. So, yes. You like to
Emphasizing for the people at home.
Yes, Keith is emphasizing because you can't see me moving my clicker on the thing. So anyway, and then also rotating boxes. Some bees will do this automatically where they move up and down like good bees because they read the bee books. Mine never seem to do that. So what happens is if you look in this bottom right picture, you'll get bees that are up in the top box, that gray box. And if they're all up there in the spring, you can move them down to the bottom and then just flip the boxes. And so now they have the space above them and they're less likely to swarm. But sometimes you'll have bees with brood in both boxes. Here, where's your clicker?
Oh, come on.
Yeah,
I'm getting lazy.
so here, and if it's spread between 2 boxes, you don't want to then split that because then you're splitting the brood. So if they're in both boxes, you just got to live with it. But if they're enough in one box, you can always slip them down to the bottom. Some bees will do that automatically. They'll go down and start filling down there. Others just don't seem to realize that there's any space below them. They don't like the basement. All right, on your new hives, after you install them, you want to inspect after 5 to 7 days. You want to make sure your queen released. You want to add new boxes and frames as needed. Feed sugar syrup. Bees use 6 to 8 pounds of honey to produce 1 pound of wax. So they need a lot of food. If you are installing them on foundation, they need a ton of food. And so feed them, feed them, feed them, feed them. I've seen a lot of people install packages and then feed for 2 weeks and then leave them to their own devices and they starve to death. So it's just, you got to be feeding them. Keep your entrances small. And then of course, monitor at install your mite levels. I hear it all the time. I just installed my hives. I shouldn't have to worry about mites until next year. That used to be the case, but like I said earlier, on those newly installed hives, we are seeing high mite counts on some of them, not across the board, but we see it often enough that it's becoming more usual than unusual. So it's a good exercise, actually, if you set up a little kind of email chain. If you have new beekeepers in the area and they're installing their packages and they're doing mite washes, it's nice to keep a record of what you're seeing. I know York does it, Kennebec does it, and Knox Lincoln does it. So they just keep track so that it's kind of a maybe you can find out who the suppliers who may have issues, more issues are. So and so that's false. You can't get away with 2 years of not treating or monitoring on new hives now anymore. Okay, so in June, register your apiaries. You're required by state law to do that. You can find the form on my website. And we start our first honey flows kind of at the end of May, early June, sometimes middle of May. It just depends on how warm the spring is. And bee populations are increasing. And so on your overwintered hives, you want to add your honey supers if needed, manage for swarm prevention. So some people like to do splits, other people like to equalize. So you make sure all your hives are the same. You also want to monitor for mites again and monitor your queen performance. Pretty much you're going to do that every month. Monitor for mites, monitor queen performance, look for food. And then in your new hives, you want to continue increasing space. So typically you add your second box when you have 6 to 7 frames in the bottom that are drawn out, and you want to keep moving outside frames that are not being drawn. So if this is on new foundation, towards the center, not right in the center, but kind of in a frame, and move anything that they have food in towards the outside, so that it encourages them to keep drawing those frames. And then put on your second box, not when the bottom one is all packed and drawn out and full of stuff. You want to put it on a little bit before that happens. So when you're 6 to 7 frames in the bottom, or 7 to 8 frames in the bottom drawn out. Monitor queen performance, all that stuff, mites, all that. And so adding honey supers, this is a controversial thing. People fight with me all the time on it, whether you should top super or bottom super. So top supering is when you put the empty super on top of the full honey box. Bottom super is when you put the full honey super, the empty super below the full honey super. It's personal preference. I always bottom super. I find that bees, once they hit this honey, they won't find this top box and the empty super if it's up on top, but other beekeepers swear to me that that's not a problem. They just dump boxes on top and it's fine. If you have foundation though, if you're drawing foundation, usually they will not go up there above honey and do that. The same thing goes with an excluder. Often if you put an empty, undrawn foundation super up above an excluder, the bees will ignore it. And so usually I tell people that if you're putting on new foundation, super with new foundation, take the excluder out for a bit, let them work on it, and then shake the bees down. If you really feel serious about using an excluder, then put the excluder back once they've started going up into that top box, and they'll continue doing it. The other thing is checkerboarding, and checkerboarding is a great practice, especially if you have frames that, you ready? Frames that are undrawn. So here we have a brood box in the bottom left, and then above it is a full honey super. So what you would do is, if you had foundation frames, is you would actually checkerboard them in with the honey here, and then put those 2 boxes back on top of the brood. And you want to make sure that I like this because it causes the bees to draw out those frames straight and flush with the wax. If you put a whole box of foundation on a hive, often the bees will do this thing where they leave this like space kind of, and they bubble it out from the foundation and they just do their own thing. So if you have to use foundation and you have a whole box of foundation, totally fine. Just make sure you push them all in towards the center and don't space them out. Put them tight towards the center of the box. Don't, like, if there's extra room, leave it on the outsides. Does that all make sense? Yeah, great. This is I like these are artistic bees. This is what happens when you forget to put frames in your hive. They just fill up the space with whatever they want. And this is a hot mess and it's a waste of their time. And because you're just going to cut it all off. Yeah. And then making splits and nukes. Again, this is another one of those things where people feel very passionate about how they do this. There's the standard walk away. I don't usually recommend this one. I like to find my queen and know where she is. But you pretty much just split the 2 hives in 2, and then you separate them, and then the queen will be in one of them, and hopefully the other one makes a queen. That's pretty much the gist of it. And so these tend to be a little bit higher failure rate than some of the other methods, like finding your queen. So I would find my queen in this original parent hive that's in the middle of the page, and then move her to a new hive. So we move her down here away, and then we divide the resources, and then the original hive, or the empty, the other stuff, this second hive that you make up, you put that back where the original hive was, and either let them make their own queen or give them a queen, so that you've taken your queen, moved her to a new location, and then put the hive that needs a queen in the original location. And the reason for that, you want to move that queen simply because bees will stay with her. They'll stay with brood, they'll stay with the queen. But B, all of the foragers that you've moved with the queen to another location will come back to the original. This is the exact thing that Lindy was talking about as far as boosting hive. They'll go back to that original one. So this one will take a population hit, that split that's away, will take a population hit, but they have a queen that's laying right now that will make up that difference. Whereas this one, we're in the original spot, we'll get that foraging force back. And so that it's okay if they get that extra population. So it's okay if you have a couple days before you put in a new queen or they develop a queen. Yeah.
Are there things to consider between, just keeping an eye on a colony and just keep giving them more boxes as they grow versus making a split?
Oh,
If you only have one bee, or why would you do one or the other?
so it depends on what your motivation is. So if your motivation is to make honey, keeping your hives big and strong and not splitting them too often is your best way to do that. So you want a big foraging force. And so then you would just keep adding honey boxes and then hope that they don't swarm all over the place for you and
Or
keep
get a
up
lot
on
of
it.
mites.
What?
Or get a lot of mites.
Or get a lot of mites. But if you don't mind having a couple extra hives, splitting some is a way to recoup losses in the winter. So if you lose a hive during the winter, you can make a split and make up that lost hive. So it's kind of like I think the most functional bee yard has a combination of both. So you have some production hives. So you'll hear me say production hives, those are honey producing hives. And then you have replacement hives. And those are the ones that you're going to split to make up for any losses that you might have had. So it's really just what your intention is. I like making bees, so I do quite a bit of splitting. I'll talk about how I split later on. I don't split in May or June. I think it's a waste of, it's kind of the worst time to do it because that's our best honey flow. And so I want my hive strong because that's when I'm going to get my most honey. But I'll talk about that in a couple minutes. And I think Jeff's actually talked about a similar technique as well in the past. And so, but with this, it really just depends on what your intentions are.
Okay.
Yeah. So, okay. And then if you can't find your queen, this is a super complicated graph that doesn't make any, or diagram that doesn't make very much sense. If you can't find your queen, but you still want to move her, you can use an excluder to help you do that. You can do it one of two ways. You can put the excluder between the two boxes. So set them up how you would do a split, put the queen between the excluder between two boxes, come back in 3 or 4 days and see where you have eggs. If you have eggs in the bottom box, you know your queen is there, you pull that out and you put it to a new spot. And then you drop down the top box. But if you see eggs in the top, you move that to the new place and leave that other one there. So you can see where your queen is really easily. The other thing you can do is the shake method using an excluder. So if you don't want to wait 4 days, I'm impatient, is you divide your 2 hives, shake all the bees into the bottom box, put on a queen excluder, put the second box on top that has your other set of resources like brood and stuff like that. Give it like an hour. Those nurse bees will come up through, cover your brood. You know your queen's in the bottom because you shook all your bees down there, right? And she didn't come up through the excluder. So now you pull out the bottom box and move it to a new location. There are some issues with that, is you can damage the queen by shaking her into a box. Sometimes they can, break a wing or antenna. So if you're uber cautious about your queens, it's maybe not the better of the 2 ways, but it works in a jam. If I have a beekeeper who we're trying to do splits, we cannot find a queen, I'm not coming back in 3 days to do that. So we'll shake them down. Most of the time it's fine. So those are the 2 ways to use a queen excluder, kind of to your advantage if you can't find your queen. We also use that technique when we have to requeen a hive if it's aggressive or something. You can shake all those bees down and then in an hour, move that bottom box. You know your queen's going to be in there. A lot of the foraging force will go back, and then you can find her really quickly because that hive is going to be smaller now because all of the stuff has moved up and the foraging force is left. So it's a nice way to find it in the peak of the summer. Okay, so July. Colonies hit their peak. We also usually hit dearth. And so what to focus on? Add empty honey supers as needed. Sometimes we get a good honey flow throughout the whole entire season. We don't really get much of a dearth, maybe a week or 2. Other times we've had 6 weeks of dearth. So it's just keep monitoring, make sure that if you're seeing them still bring in nectar, keep giving them honey supers. Monitor your queens. You can remove filled supers as honey flow slows. This is something that kind of a lot of beekeepers commented on to me last year. They're like, I had a ton of honey in this hive 3 weeks ago, and now it's all gone. Because if you go into dearth, your bees are just going to eat all that honey. So if you want to keep that honey, take it off so they can't eat it and maybe feed them. So if you feel like there's still food stress, you can feed sugar syrup in the middle of the summer. You just want to be careful. If you're feeding one, you're feeding them all, because otherwise you start robbing all over the place. And you can hold that or extract it and hold it in a cool protected location until fall and evaluate whether you need it. So if you want to put it back on or feed it back to them, you want to look for monitor your varroa populations. This is usually the time when beekeepers need to start treating. If they had really great overwinter or fall cleanup treatments, this is about the time, July, August, September, that time period is when those mites are starting to get out of control again. And so you might want to, at this point, when you do your varroa rolls, if you're kind of on that cusp of needing to do a treatment versus not, you have a lot more options if you don't have honey supers on than if you do have honey supers on. So it might be a timing thing at this point, what you used. And then keep an eye on robbing. If you're starting to see lots of debris coming out of your hives like this, that's robbing. The bees, they'll find weak hives or even just less strong than them hives, and they kind of smash and grab. So they rip off the cappings and suck down the honey and leave with it. And they're not neat about it. So they leave all their debris around. Make up your nukes. Oh, so this is what we're going to talk about. So this is actually when I do my splits is in July. I like this time period. A lot of beekeepers have been really switching to this sort of thing. And then in your new hives, so if you got a package, this is a time to really look very closely at that queen. We do see a higher rate of failure on queens from packages. I mean, they had to transport all the way up here. They had a bunch of stress. Sometimes they're not properly mated all the way. So there's lots of issues. So I usually suggest this is the time period when it's really easy to get locally raised queens. Everybody has them. And so this might be the time to pull that queen and then put in a new one. That'll increase your chance of survival. And I'll talk about the way that I do splits. And I would do the same exact thing for that requeening that package. Oh, robbing, feed if needed. Sorry, I'm going back a little bit. So keep an eye on robbing, feed if needed. And so the severe drought that we've been getting the last couple of years is becoming more normal. We're seeing it pretty much the last 2 years, and in most of New England, we're also seeing drought for several years before that. And so bees during this time period will actually reduce their brood production. If no food is coming in the hive, they'll start aborting, chewing up larvae and pupa and tossing them out of the front of the hive if they can't feed them. And we're also seeing EFB, so European foul brood, used to be a spring disease and it was food stress related. We're actually seeing it more often in July now than we do in the spring. Our springs have been nice and warm, lots of fly days, early blooms. They've been getting plenty of food, and more beekeepers are actually paying attention to feeding in the spring. It's like a frog, but not so much in July. And so bees are becoming food stressed and they're popping positive with EFB all over the place. And so that's something else that can happen. All right. And so make up your nukes, queen retirement facilities. That's the way I do my splits. And so what I do is I do it at this point because larger hives in the spring make more honey. And so makes sense, right? So if I'm not splitting in the spring, those hives typically make more honey for me, and then I pull it off before we go into dearth in July. Also, local suppliers have queens at this point. So if I don't want to make my own queen, I can get a locally raised queen and pop it right into my hive at this point. In May or June, locally raised queens are still a little bit sparse. You can sometimes find them. Some of the breeders have them available, but not very many. And there's usually a long waiting list. So you have to really rely on making your own queens at that point. I start the following year with a young queen. So if I put in a queen in July or make my own and she comes out in August, that queen lays for August and into September and then shuts down, right? So in the spring, she is raring to go and she builds up really quickly. She also is young still, relatively speaking, and has a lot of queen pheromone. And so when a hive has a lot of queen pheromone, they're less likely to swarm or replace her. And so these hives typically don't swarm then if they have a brand new queen in this, like pretty much brand new queen in the spring. And so it's nice because what I do is I also at the same time I'm retiring my old queen. So I don't just go around pinching queens. I will do that for you if you ask me to. I will do it brutally and I'll just pinch your queen. If you want me to kill your queen, I'll kill her. But I don't do it on my own hives. I actually have a pretty tender heart when it comes to killing queens. And so I take my older queens and I make a little nuke up with them. So I make a little 5-frame nuke. And that's how I do my split. And then I put a new queen or I make my own queen in the original production hive. So if I have 6 hives, 6 production hives, I make up 6 nukes and I put my little queen, my old queens in there and then give everybody new queens. So the next year they're all wonderful. And then if she fails, because older queens are more likely to fail over the winter or fail in general, as they get older, they're more likely to fail. And so I've only lost a nuke then, not my production hive. And so it's a way to hedge my bets. And then the final thing is I overwinter these. So I let them grow up from 5 frames. I put a second nuke box on. So then they're 10 frames, 5 on 5. So I let them grow up. I feed them. I get them ready. I put 2 of them together, wrap them as 1 unit, and I overwinter them small. So I overwinter them as a 5 on 5 frame nuke, buddied with another one. And so there's a lot of benefits to that. Plus, I love having nukes around the yard because if I have a problem, they're like the fix it for everything. Really. What?
It's a mash unit.
It is. It's like, yeah, absolutely. If you lose your queen or you go queenless in September after a mite treatment, just take that nuke and plop it right in. You are queen right again. If you have a hive that's, that needs a boost, just pinch your old queen and stick that in there and they've gotten their boost and it's more likely to survive. And so it's a really great strategy. Mostly I moved this way and it works well for me because my May and June are impossible. Like y'all keep me busy in May and June. So I don't have time to deal with my own hives. So this really works very well for me. But there's a lot of beekeepers who've started also doing the same sort of strategy and they find it works really great for them. So in the spring, I know your question. No, I know your question. It's going to be, but I'm going to have like 10 hives then the next year because I've just split 5 of them into nukes, right? And they all survived and because that's my luck. Well, if you are a beekeeper, you can go ahead. This is an overwintered nuke and sell it to some other beekeeper. Have me come out in the fall and I'll look through your parent hives. Everything's fine. You can sell this in the spring or I'll come out in the spring and look at it and you can sell it and sell 5 of the frames. The other 5 you use to boost your production hives and that gives you even more bees to make you honey. And so you don't have to necessarily keep growing. You can always sell bees. Unfortunately, I don't sell bees because of my position. So I just buy more property to put bees on. We just bought another property to do that. I didn't tell my husband that's why we bought it. He thought it was for a sugar bush, but it's for bees. So yeah. What?
Tax write-off.
Yeah, oh God, I wish. Anyway, so, but this is a good strategy especially if, it's just a good strategy. I don't know. It's a good strategy, right, Keith? Keith likes it.
There's always people that need bees,
Always.
especially the people that are like not taking classes or don't join the club.
Yes.
You hear about them through the grapevine. Where can I get bees in like July or August?
Yeah.
I got a nuke.
Yeah, I'll sell you a nuke in July. No, but yeah, so you can actually have, yards where you have nukes and full size hives just fine. Here's the side by sides and you can wrap this as 1 unit up in the top left picture. None of these are my yard. Mine don't look this neat, but plus I'm even more colorful than these hives here.
I do recognize all those 3-frame nukes though.
Which one, these ones?
Yeah, and then in the other picture. I have some like that.
Yeah.
Not as colorful.
Not as colorful, but yeah, so there's lots of reasons to maybe think about when we split because our August, September, our late July, August honey flows have not been as great. And so if you're keeping your hive strong for that period of time, it may be beneficial to actually switch to focusing your honey production in those earlier, more, what is the thing?
April, May.
April, May, June, your early flows that are more reliable than the late season ones.
Any suggestions if you have a regular job and the weather just doesn't cooperate on a Saturday?
Yeah.
Take a day off.
Oh, I've been there, so, but I never ever see my husband. And I have been out at night installing queens, like at 10 PM at night with a red headlamp out
Aren't they
there.
freaking
like-
angry as hell?
Oh, they're terrible.
Yeah.
They're terrible. Red headlamp though, if you have to do it at night. Yeah, it's, so you don't have to do everything. Like if you have 3 hives and you have, an hour before dinner or something, go through 1 hive. Like, don't put the pressure on yourself to go through everything. Just know that 3 days later, when you have another hour, you go through the
I
second
just keep
hive.
doing between 10 and 2 and it's like,
Yeah.
can't.
Oh, no,
I get home at 7,
no, you can.
Do them before you go to work.
Yeah, as you can look at these anytime,
Okay.
really, during the daylight hours. So there is a sweet time with hives. That's like right before dusk, when they are the most gentle, loving things ever. But if you push it 1 minute too far, they turn into this crawling, like demon phase.
Everyone comes home.
Everybody, yeah, where they crawl on, and then they're like 3, 2, 1, sting. And they've gotten all, you don't even realize it because they crawl and they get up your pants and they're just hanging out until they get the call. And then everybody stings at once. It's terrible. But yeah, anytime, I mean, we have long days during the summer and I have been out, inspecting bees all day. And then I get home at like 5, 6 or 7, and I'll go out and pop into my bees until 9 when the sun is starting to go down. So as long as it's not too cold, like it's fine. During the summer, it usually isn't.
Okay.
So yeah, you don't have to fit it into any hours. Yeah, Keith looks at his like 4 AM in the morning, so. Whenever you can fit it.
When I have time to look at them.
Yeah. Okay, so we finally made it to August. So the colonies just past peak, starting to raise larvae that are destined to be winter bees. Mite levels continue increasing, so you can see that down here. But our bee populations are decreasing, so that's where we start getting into this really critical time. And the last honey flow goldenrod usually starts in August. I say usually, the last few years, it hasn't been much of anything. So you want to keep doing mite treatments if you need to, and sampling and mite treatments. See if your hives is needed, check your queen. There's still to requeen if there's a problem. I always say, don't give your queen too long to work it out. They usually don't. You got to replace them. And the earlier you replace a failing queen, the better off you are. Because then they can catch up. If you're waiting till the end of August to replace a queen, they're probably not going to be really strong going into the winter. Keep an eye on your weaker hives for robbing, figure out which hives you're going to overwinter. This is really important, and position your brood in honey stores in anticipation for winter. There's no reason why you can't start in August, moving your honey frames to the outside of the boxes, moving in empty frames so that they start filling them out properly, and start kind of thinking about what you're going to do. And this one is really important. Figure out which hives you're going to enter overwinter. You want to be out of August with intention. And so what that means is you want to assess each one of your hives at this point. Go out with a piece of paper. This is important because you will forget, and write down what you want to do with each hive. Like, this one is weak, this one is strong, this one has a stellar queen that I want to keep forever and I love her till the end of time. And you want to make sure that you have intention, because it comes September, you're going to go out there and you're going to start seeing issues with your hives, and you're gonna be like, oh God, this one's strong, I'm going to combine it with this one over here. And you're going to start kind of panicking and you'll make weird decisions. And so you want to think about this in the context of taking your losses in the fall. If you have 2 weak hives, combine them into 1 strong hive, so that is more likely to get through 1 strong hive that you can then split in the spring if you want to, then 2 dead weak hives. Like, take your losses in the fall. Don't try to squeak through weak hives. It's just not, it never worked out, rarely worked out. And then you want to combine and boost your weak hives. Those are your goals. Your goal is to think about those two things. And then also to equalize. Everything should go into the winter the same. I cannot tell you, it ticks every neuroses in my body when I go out to a bee yard and there's hives that are this tall and hives that are like this tall, and it's just a willy-nilly crazy mess. Everything in the winter should be the same. It will make your life so much easier. You want the same strength, the same configuration, the same food stores. That way it's easier during the winter to assess things like standardized wrapping, but assess feeding. So if you go into 2 of your hives, you have 20 hives, you go into 2 or 3 of them and everybody needs food because they're all the same. And so it makes it a lot easier to figure that out. And also just standardizing everything just makes so much more sense. It just helps me in my neuroses. Okay, so finally, so write this down, and then you're gonna do this in the next month. So you're gonna actualize your plan. You're gonna visualize or come up with it and then actualize it. I feel like that's like a self-help thing, actualize your plan. So yeah, I would never overwinter like this. Look at all those crazy ass hives. Anyway, so we're in September, October, the year is winding down. The queen is drastically reduced egg laying. All the new bees are winter bees, and the hive is making its last foraging pushes. You can see also this is where our mite populations are still kind of a little bit increasing because there's still a little brood in there, but our bee populations are drastically decreasing. So that could be really problematic. So sample again. And I would say if you can sample in October, sample again, because it's not uncommon for spikes to happen as other people's hives are dying and collapsing from mites. You will inherit their problems. If a hive in the area has high varroa mites, your hive is probably going to go over there and rob it out because it's weak and come back loaded with mites, those bees. Also, as that hive dies, if the queen dies before all of the adult bees, they give up they just leave. So they'll go and disperse to every other hive in the area. So this great little research project, this researcher, she marked every bee in a varroa collapsing hive, let it collapse. Then she sampled every hive for a 2-mile radius and found marked bees in them. So these bees are dispersing into all the rest of the hives. And so it's not unusual for you to have good mite control, everything's nice and low, everything's wonderful. And then in October, boom, way up high with mites as you're inheriting somebody else's problem. So harvest any extra honey. You can feed if needed. Don't wait too long to feed. I have beekeepers who are like, hey, should I start feeding? And it's like October 5th. I'm like, dude, you should have been feeding like a whole last month. And so usually as soon as you're pulling off your last of the honey supers, you're going to start feeding if you need to. If those 2 bottom boxes aren't heavy, aren't full, you should be feeding. And you want to finish by mid-October. Some years it can be later, some it may be sooner, but most often it's been later. But mid-October you have to give the bees a week or so after you give them their last bit of syrup to get the moisture out of it and cure it. So you don't want to push all the way up to the first like hard frost. Because then they're gonna have too much moisture in their hive. So you want to finish by mid-October and take measures to prevent robbing, and then implement your plan. You want to combine or boost weak hives, and you want to equalize. If you have hives that are boiling over with bees, those are also unlikely to really survive the winter. They blow through their food, all of that. So this is a good opportunity to start moving bees. So you have a weak hive, take a couple frames of bees over here and shake them out, nurse bees or whatever, and kind of combine them. Or you can switch locations. This is where you do it. So you take your weak hive and put it in the spot where the strong hive was and let them get back that force. So yeah, so all that, and then install your mouse guards. This is really important. Okay, so, oh shoot, all right. This is the mite bomb thing. I already explained this. I forget what the next thing is. I don't know why. This is the mite bomb thing where that hive collapsed in the middle, and then they found for 2 miles all of these hives had.
That's a lot of bees to have marked.
It is. You don't even, graduate students,
Yeah.
you can get them to do anything, like the most annoying, like counting how many bees are in a half a cup versus a cup. And then doing the ratios to see where you get the sweet spot, like 100 bees is too few to sample, but you don't really need to sample 500, so 300, and that's half a cup. So, yeah, it's amazing.
What did we get you to do as a graduate student years ago?
Oh, I actually worked with wasps as a graduate student. So I got my master's doing studying a ground nesting wasp, and it was a great one too. It goes out and collects beetles, and it stings them and paralyzes them, and then brings them to their underground nest, where it then lays its eggs on it, and the eggs hatch, and the larvae consumes the still paralyzed beetle while it's alive. Oh, it's amazing. But these
It's a great cartoon.
I know.
I have to show.
And these bees, these wasps were amazing because they were the laziest wasps ever. They got up around 10 in the morning, and then they shut down their like entrances to their nests at like 4. And so it was like I just kind of like mosey out of bed, drive out to the field site, and then I just sit in these baseball fields and gravel pits, just watching marked wasps and, you know, calculated, like measuring how long they took to go get a forage. And then I'd steal their prey when they came back with it and identify it. It was the best. Like, it was open sun. I had such a nice tan, and I didn't have to stress out like getting out there like the crack of dawn, because they didn't get really moving until 10 a.m. It was amazing. It was a great walk.
Really.
Yeah, it was the Packers hours. It was amazing. It was like the best research project ever. I did write it for myself. That's why I was like, I want to do this. So we got some grant money, so I decided to finish up my master's. So that's what I did. Good. All right. So, all right. So this is also what you may see if you start seeing high mite issues. So you can see these brood in these pictures. You can see their eyeballs. So these are pupa that are about to emerge as adults. They're not, because they're uncapped, they're dead now or dying or sick. But there is no point you should ever see eyeballs like uncapped pupa. So the way bees develop is that once they feed the larvae and they put all the food in there, and then they cap it, and then once it's capped, the bees pupate. And then they form like into bees from larvae into these pupa that have eyeballs, and then they emerge as adults. There's no reason for them to ever be uncapped unless they're sick or in some sort of stress or dead. And so if you're seeing a bunch of, we call it ball brood, where you can see the pupa underneath that are being uncapped, or little holes in the cappings, that's because the bees sense that there's something wrong with that and are looking in the cells. So they're uncapping it, and they're probably going to chew down these pupa. So you can see in these pictures, like here, they're chewing up the heads of these pupa and pulling them out and disposing of them because they died. And so if you're seeing a lot of ball brood, you almost always have a really bad mite problem. So, and then this is my favorite hive to ever show. This is the very first hive I inspected in this position. I didn't know what I was doing, and I got a random phone call like 3 days sitting at my desk, like, I'm pretending to work. I don't know what I do, just tapping on the keyboard really loudly and humming. And then I got a phone call, I have a dead hive, and I was like, oh, now I know what to do. And so I went out, and this was November, and you can see the mites just all over the bottom board. So, sorry, I'm going back.
That's fine.
So this was a strong hive going into the winter, had plenty of food, everything. And this is all that was left, was like a cup of dead bees, maybe a cup and a half. And like I said, the bottom board, just mite after mite after mite after mite, just tons of mites, another whole thing of mites. And what happens in this case is these strong hives, as they get more mites, their immune systems are compromised because they're being sucked out of their bodies. They're getting viruses in them. They spread the virus to their larvae through, so the viruses move through the body unchecked because now they don't have immune system because it's been sucked out by the bees and the fat bodies. And the viruses end up in a gland in the head called the hypopharyngeal gland, which produces the substance that they mix with pollen to feed their young. So they feed all their young virus infected food, they get sick, and their fat bodies are all getting sucked out too by mites that are in the reproductive phase and they're in their thing, and everybody's sick. And so what happens is bees are a lot nicer than we are. When they're sick, they don't go to work. They don't like spread it to everybody else in the room. What they do is they go off and fly someplace else and die. They leave the hive. So it's like removal. They remove themselves from the system if they're sick. And so what happens in these hives is that you have a big population. As bees are feeling sick, they're flying out, and that population shrinks smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until we get the first hard freeze, and then they freeze to death because they don't have enough bees to stay warm. So I get a lot of people who are like, hey, my hive absconded in the fall. And I'm like, no, you had varroa mites and all your hives died. You had like your bees died elsewhere, your queen died, and then all your bees went to other people and caused problems for them. So I'm not going to go through treatments or anything. I've talked about that ad nauseum, but there are some resources. This thing, the Tools for Varroa Management by Honeybee Health Coalition, they just updated it. This picture is the 5th edition. They're now on the 8th edition, and they updated it in August this year. If you look on the back pages in the editorial staff, I am one of them, but it is a really great guide. It's one of the few free things in beekeeping, and it's like the Bible for varroa mites. They have videos, all kinds of stuff, so look it up. There's cards on the table for it. They also have a little app too that you can put in, like answer 4 or 5 questions, and it spits out what's the best treatment for that time period. They ask you about temperature, how big your hive is, whether you have honey supers on, things like that. So it's a good little tool. And then there's also this cheat sheet, trifold that we came up with that goes through on the inside. It has how to do a mite wash, some of the signs of mites, and then on the inside, some of the treatments that we have, all the miticides, and then some of the prevention treatments. And so it goes through the product, then when they work best, if there's any temperature restrictions. Oh, sorry. This one, temperature restrictions, whether you can have honey supers, how long you put the treatment in, how it goes in, and then also what PPE you need. If you shoot me an email, I'll send you the guide and the little card for the Honeybee Health Coalition so you can remember as well with your screens if you need them. And then finally, for September, October, you want to install your mouse guards. It's really important. I see a lot of mice and shrews that are destroying hives. I usually say Augusta South tends to be mice and sometimes rats, which is super gross. I have a thing for rats. I'm fighting them in my chicken coop right now. It's like a terrible battle. I'm losing. But north of Augusta, it tends to be mice and shrews as opposed to mice and rats. And then as you get farther north, it becomes more often shrews. So mice will actually nest in the hive a lot of times, whereas shrews will come in during the day, grab your bees, eat them, and then go back to wherever they live. And so they visit over and over and over. And mice will do the same if they don't set up a nest in there early, they'll come in kind of during the winter and eat your bees too on weak hives. And so you want something with metal, you can buy them from any bee shop. There's a million different designs. Some of them have their pros, some of them have their cons. You can make your own, just make sure there's some sort of metal. Mice chew through wood. You could train your cat to be your mouse guard.
That's a good idea.
None of these are my cats, but this one on the left is beautiful. I don't know whose cat that is, but that is a gorgeous cat. But my cats are not useful like this. They actually catch mice alive and release them in the house like jerks. And then finally in November, you don't have any brood. Your clustering is more common at 40 and below. And you should be at a good point at this point. You shouldn't be calling me asking how you need to do with your hives for the winter. Like if you're already done, like you're way past done, you should have been thinking about that in May. And you want to remove any mite treatments, apply your last OAV if needed, and then you want to winterize colonies. My caveat with winterizing colonies is that is another controversial thing with beekeepers. So I always say it's very regional. It's also very specific to the beekeeper, and even between microclimates, like your backyard versus somebody else's, it can be very different what's successful for you. So ask your local club members for advice. They'll know what works best in the area. But most people are doing some sort of wrapping or insulation. It's not so much to keep hives cold, warm is wrapping. It's more because bees can handle really cold temperatures. They do fine in really cold areas. The thing that wrapping can do, I think where it plays a crucial role is when we have wide fluctuations in temperature, it may be just a little bit extra so those bees can get back together when we're dropping temperature really quickly and they've been spread out. So wrapping or insulating, and it doesn't hurt. Like sometimes it may help, not all the time, but it also doesn't hurt. So you might as well do it. Some people install moisture absorbing material, whether it's particle boards or things with sawdust in them, stacks of newspaper, bee quilts. I've seen it all. Fondant and sugar, some people put it on in November. Other people will wait until they need it in maybe February or so. And then straps and weights on your lids. That's really important. You'd be surprised. It doesn't take much wind during the winter when there's no leaves on the trees to lift off a cover. I've seen many hives tip over during the winter and survive just fine. It happens, they can still keep warm, but it's better if they don't have to do that. All right, so remember, winter prep doesn't start in September, but it starts during your first hive opening. You really want to focus every single month on your varroa mites and viruses, nutrition, your queen quality, and then all the 500 other thousand things that I said. But really kind of, this is the next step, is like, how do we apply these 3 things to your full year? And so, like I said, this was a ton of information. I completely understand that. And it's a lot to go through. So if you want a copy of this, just shoot me an email and I'll send you a PDF. Just because I think it's right here. Because I make these presentations for you. They're your resource and I want you to have access to them. I'll also be giving this same talk. I try to give each of the clubs the same talk throughout the year so that I don't have to make 500 different talks. But I will be giving the same talk at the MSBA webinar in October, so you can catch it a second time if you've missed it the first time, or you just really want to hear my voice for another hour and a half, because I feel like that's how long I talked for. I did. And but if so there will also be a recording of this, so they record them, and so everybody can have access to it going in the future. So please reach out, and if there's any questions, I'll answer them. Oh, I do have one thing for the people in the room. So if you want to see AFB scale. See, if you don't show up, you miss all the good stuff. We have AFB scale that we're going to show everybody. So here, this is AFB scale in it. It's an irradiated frame. It's no longer infective. So it's the spores have all been killed. So you don't have to worry about that. The reason why we put it behind glass is because beekeepers like to poke things and they ruin all my frames. So this is a black light. And so what you're going to do to see the scale is you're going to put this in your belly button facing down, and then look in the bottoms of the cells and you'll see the scale glowing kind of like a light mossy green. And so
Just everything that you were telling me about.
so you're going to look in the bottom of the cells. So the bottoms are that way. And you're going to see mossy green spores, American foul brood.
Oh.
So any questions online? Everybody fell asleep. Because I only went over by half an hour, well, 39 minutes. So
You mentioned evening out hives, colonies. You can take a frame and just put it in another without soft introduction or whatever.
no. So yeah, you can. Sorry, I was saying no, but yes, you can. So if you have a frame, there are 2 things that bees love: food and babies. And so if you can take a frame of capped brood with the bees associated with it, or uncapped brood with the bees associated, they'll be nurse bees. They also love nurse bees. Nurse bees are super chill. Wherever they live, that's where they live. They don't care. So if you take a frame of brood and bees and plop it into another hive, no problem.
So how do you make sure that it's not covered with foragers?
If it's open brood, it's probably not covered, or I'm sorry, if it's calf brood, it's probably not covered with foragers. They have no reason to be
Okay.
there.
Alright.
And calf brood is nice because they don't need to feed it. Open brood, same thing. It's gonna be mostly nurse bees there
Okay.
because the foragers come into the door, they feed their food to somebody else and they take it into the hive. A lot of the times there'd be foragers in there, but even if there's a couple on the frame, they'll just kill them. There's no problem. Or they'll work their way back out and go back to their original home.
Really good point.
So,
Couldn't see it very well, but I shared it with the people.
oh, okay. So, yeah. Yeah, and then the other thing is food. You can always move food between hives. But I do want to encourage you. I actually have been talking a lot with the new beekeepers this year. So a lot of the clubs asked me to come and talk to their new beekeeper schools. And one of the things that I've been talking to them about, which I thought made common sense, but actually now that I'm thinking about it, or as I've been thinking about it this season, if you are boosting a hive that has a problem, so you have a hive that has EFB, European foul brood, or chalk brood or something like that, and you are going to boost it. So you're going to take a frame of calf brood, take it from one hive and put it into the next to give them a boost. That's absolutely wonderful. That's a great practice to boost that weak hive that's sick, that needs a boost, that needs some help. But a lot of times what beekeepers do is now you have an empty hole here and you have a frame in your hand that you took out of the sick hive.
Yeah.
And then you turn and you stick that into your healthy hive that you just took out of. So it's being really intentional with things like that. So make sure that if you are moving stuff that you're thinking about it before you just plop that into the hole, because now you've just brought the infection over to the good hive as well. So just making sure that you're paying attention when you do things like that. So, great. Yeah, that one's a good one. New York gave me that frame, so they got a little grant to get them irradiated and then get all the apiary inspectors, the cases made, and apiary inspectors who wanted them. So they shipped that out to us. All right, great. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so do you want me to leave here? Oh, this is you.
That's me.
Okay.
Yours is down on the floor.
Mine's on the floor. And I'm just a
Go
participant.
ahead, yeah, grab your thing, do whatever you need to do. And we're
Keith, if you stop sharing the presentation, it'd be easier for us to see.
yeah, Jen's sharing it, so I'm not gonna remove her share, I'll let her do it.
Yeah, with the concave area.
There we go.
Thank you.
Oh, you grab resources if you need them over here. Oh. Oh, yeah, there's regular and wide. Let's make my own. Some people know who I am. Like another.
And this is why you come to the person. Don't tell them, because then they're gonna be, hey, Lindy, give me one of those ones.
Well, yeah, there we go. Well,
And you would,
we should ask,
you would share.
who needs one?
Yeah, and I can always send them to him too.
Oh,
No, you cannot take the money. That's worth big money right there. Good, everybody saw the AFB?
Yeah.
Great, yeah, that's really cool. Yeah,
Well, I'll look at it. Let's bring it back over here.
okay.
Stop sharing those.
It makes it feel any better. I have to be in Rockport in the morning for weather school.
For what?
Weather school. I'll start at 3 and drive up to Rockport.
Down.
yeah.
I inherited one from here to Balsam Falls.
Oh, okay.
Grab my readers.
3 miles away.
It's almost ready.
I'm not saying I'm old and blind, but I'm old and
Stay
blind.
tuned. Oh. I might. Do a 5-minute meeting. 5-minute meeting.
Any suggestions on where to get bees and hives from locally?
I don't.
If you're talking woodenware, I mean, You've got Humble Abodes up in Windsor. You've got Cooper's in Wyndham. You got Backwoods in Wyndham. You got Phil at the Honey Exchange on Stevens Ave in Portland.
There's a,
Backwoods
MSBA has a-
Yeah, he has, everybody that has packages, basically, if you didn't order one, it's not necessarily too late, because they always bring up more than, in case there's dead. And until they're gone, they're not gone. So don't hesitate to give them a call.
and also.
Just don't take them all, because I never order any. And
On
I
the
end up buying what they
MSBA
love.
website, I don't know who it was that was on there, can they hear me?
Yeah,
Check the MSBA website.
yeah, there's a drop down on the Maine State Beekeepers Association website that has a list of beekeeping resources, so it goes and it has suppliers for woodenware and equipment and miticides and stuff like that, and then they also have queen suppliers and also nuke and package suppliers. So you can look up people there and see who's close to you. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good as I can
Yes,
see.
that's good night.
Well, somebody's got this.
Yeah.
All right.
The folks here, is that?
Hey, Janet, are you there?
I'm here.
Oh, okay. Is your one brand new beekeepers? Brand new beekeepers, none?
Brand new beekeepers?
No?
Getting through my first one.
Yay.
Got it. Did you take the class?
Yeah, that's the course
Yeah.
for about 10 years.
And I'm still.
No.
All that stuff over there, so you get it.
I've never gotten a beekeeper packet. What's that?
Yeah. These are all, this has all the, this is like all my fact sheets, stuff like that. It's all this stuff is in there too, if anybody wants.
Sure, why not?
I have tons, well, not tons, but I bring them and I'm done with bee school, so I have like 30 extras, so you're the first club that I'm seeing
Well,
after.
this is good, because we were just talking about this and I'm like, I hadn't seen one before.
Yeah, so those are the ones.
Okay, we're gonna do a business meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's get it on.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye, everyone, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay, we're gonna call the business meeting to order at 8:45. We don't have any new beekeepers here to welcome, or any, if we're any on Zoom, welcome. Minutes, did everybody get the minutes?
But there was.
Like there was, there wasn't really much. As I understand, we have not put it down. Treasurer's report, we got treasurers online.
Yep,
Pretty much.
I'm on a Zoom here. In March, we took in 365 in dues. Had some PayPal fees of 1142 and the Zoom renewal of 158.89 for net income of 194.69 brought in. Ending cash balance of 10,581.73.
Motion to accept. Second. Okay, I get it. Janet, how about our membership report?
We, excuse me, we have 294 paid up members.
Oh, very nice. Lindsay,
Yes,
Club Hives,
we lost another one. Fortunately, so we have 3 left.
you need somebody to help them find it?
What's that?
He said we
Right,
lost another
yes.
one, I asked if we needed some help
No,
find
they
it.
get cold,
Okay,
froze. So yeah, it was the last nuke that, when I tried to overwinter and it didn't make it. But there are 3 left and they're booming, so that's. Hopefully they'll.
One of my nukes froze last 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, it was right after that.
Just really got.
It was like a month ago when we had that
Yeah.
really deep freeze. It was like 31 day and then
Right.
negative the next.
right, in between storms.
Hanging up
Yeah.
on the top and they didn't make it back.
Yeah, that was like totally, the cluster was up on top, like where the sugar was, like the next box down, they were just, butts in. or butts out, whatever, everyone was,
And it's right next to.
yeah, they were just two separate.
The big house. is fine, but one of them is
Yeah.
fine.
Mr. Ben.
Yeah,
Well,
you
we
get
should
into
get the other
March, you know, and have one of
Yeah,
them.
But also, I was in touch with the Tidewater people, so it might look good to go back
Oh,
there.
okay.
I'm meeting with her next Thursday.
Nice.
To see if we can do that, so hopefully
You go put it
we'll do
someplace
something
a
in
little
May.
different?
I don't wanna say anything, make sure that everyone makes it through.
Or
Yeah, we'll
you
start
can
doing it
Put them in a
sometimes.
different place in 5 days.
Oh, yeah,
Or,
yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Alrighty,
Andy.
Andy.
Andy signed off, but there are 15 mentors. 7 new beekeepers, not including 13 additional emails in the last 24 hours.
70?
Old business,
Or something.
was there any,
7.
is there any old business, Lindsay, to go over? Okay,
Nothing I can think of right now, but I'm tired, so.
alright, okay. Under new business, I was contacted by a Pascal Michaud. Karen may know her, she's working with the research team at the University of Moncton in New Brunswick. And they're currently working on honeybee health and detection of honeybee pathogens. And she reached out to me and was asking what our biggest, I guess, problem with honeybees in our area is. And my answer to her was varroa. I
Yeah,
said, because really everything stems from the varroa as far as our bees dying, whether they're getting sick from diseases or whatever. So basically it all comes from varroa. So that's our nemesis. Our nemesis rather and stuff, so. She thought that was good information and she took that and did whatever she did with it. I'm assuming she probably put it in notes for the research team. If anybody wants to see that email, just shoot me a reply and I'll send it to you. It's no big thing. It's just asking about, like I said, just what's going on in our area and stuff, so. But it's there if anybody would like a copy of it. Also, get a hold of, I'll talk to Mark Cooper soon and find out when he's gonna have his first open hive. Cause he's usually good for an early June or mid-June or whatever open hive. And I would recommend to everybody to go to an open hive. Because you get to see so much more than what you have in just your own hives. And it's actually really good to look at, other things and have somebody point out that stuff to you. You know, you're always looking at your hives. You know, you might not notice other things that could go wrong that somebody else could point out in one of the open hives, or maybe a question that you haven't thought of. You know, somebody will come up with a question and you're like, well, why didn't I think of that, you know? So, the open hives are always a great, way to get opinions and answers and stuff like that. And, the Coopers over to Heritage Farm, they do a really, really good job. Cause it's usually, you got a couple of beekeepers and they'll open up like a dozen hives. So you really get to see a lot of different things. And ask all kinds of questions, so I would encourage everybody to go to an open hive. Any other new business?
no, other than that meeting for the club hives. That's it.
Does Janet want to give a little blurb about EAS?
Sure. So EAS is the Eastern Apicultural Society in all the states and provinces on the East Coast and Into the Midwest are members. There's an annual, they do all sorts of things, but the big thing is an annual conference that takes place every summer. It's a week long. There are going to be all sorts of amazing speakers and workshops and hands-on stuff. It's going to be in Amherst, Massachusetts. So it's practically at our back door, which is great. So if you have any desire to go this year, because it's going to be in Maryland next year and Michigan the year after that. So it'll be a longer haul. You have to be a member of EAS to attend the conference, but you can join and register pretty much at the same time. Registration is not open yet. It's not clear when it will open, but it should be sometime in the next couple of weeks. And I'll send an email to the group when registration is open.
So you have to be a member of EAS?
Yes.
Okay, you just can't be an MSBA member?
No.
Nope. No. You can, it's, I think, I can't remember. I think it's $35 a year to be an EAS member. And the conference it's pretty reasonable. I mean, it's a couple $100, but it's pretty reasonable. But they do they need a lot of volunteers for all the stuff that they do. And so you can go practically for free if you're willing to volunteer a lot of time to be a room monitor, or there are all sorts of things that volunteers can do. So that can help make it more affordable. The downside is if you're volunteering, then you can't be going to some of the lectures, but it's a good trade-off.
Thank you, Janet. Anything else? No? All right, make a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Ayes, get it.
Sorry. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Bye.